Hi everyone. In this lecture, I will be introducing you to complex syntax, which just happens to be one of my favorite subjects and also an area of research that I'm really interested in. So I'm really excited to be introducing you to complex syntax, which I think is a really interesting subject, and I hope you do also. All right, so complex syntax is simply just when a sentence contains more than one clause. And a clause is a part of a sentence which contains a subject and a predicate. The subject is the part of the clause that indicates what it is about or who performs the action. And the subject is usually, but not always, a noun. And then the predicate is the part of the sentence which contains a verb and says something about the subject. So an example of a clause would be, Amy is happy. We have our subject, Amy, and we have our predicate, is happy, which contains the verb is and says something about the subject, that she's happy. Subjects can also be longer than that. In the sentence, the student with long brown hair in the online language science class is here. That whole first part would be our subject. And then the predicate would be is here. We can also have sentences with lengthy predicates. An example would be, the student is reading the new journal article about complex syntax comprehension in children with developmental language disorder. Okay, so notice that all three of these sentences all contain only one clause. So they are all simple sentences. So it's not the length of a sentence that determines whether it's a complex sentence or not. It is the number of clauses. All right, so clauses are linked through either coordination or subordination. Coordination is used for joining two independent clauses. An independent clause is a clause which expresses a complete thought and could stand on its own as a sentence. And independent clauses are joined with coordinating conjunctions. And in English, these are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, which you can use the mnemonic device fanboys to remember these. And so when two independent clauses are joined with a coordinating conjunction, this forms a compound sentence. So an example would be, I'm drinking some Diet Coke and I'm eating some chocolate. So we have two independent clauses joined with our coordinating conjunction in the middle, and. So notice that I'm drinking some Diet Coke. That's an independent clause. It expresses a complete thought. It can be in a sentence all by itself. And same with, I'm eating some chocolate. Now, we could also have a sentence like, I'm drinking some Diet Coke and eating some chocolate, where the subject and the auxiliary verb am are elided or left out in the second clause, right there, but it's still understood to be the subject, and this would also be considered a compound sentence. Okay, so subordination is when we join a main clause and a subordinate clause. And this can be done through either embedding or adjunction. So when we have a main clause and one or more subordinate clauses, this would form a complex sentence. There are three types of complex sentences. We have complement clauses, also referred to as nominative clauses, relative clauses, and adverbial clauses. Complement clauses are added to sentences through embedding, and relative clauses and adverbial clauses are added through adjunction. And we're going to go over these three types of clauses in the following lectures. But the first step to being able to identify complex syntax is being able to identify how many clauses there are in a sentence. So we're going to practice that for a minute here. Okay, so in our first example, we have the sentence, she said I'm funny. All right, so how many clauses are in this sentence? Okay, this sentence has two clauses. The first clause has the subject she and the predicate said I'm funny. And then embedded within that predicate of the main clause is another clause, a subordinate clause, with the subject I and the predicate am funny. All right, let's try another one. I thought you said we would eat after we saw the movie. How many clauses are in this sentence? I'll give you a minute to figure it out. All right, so this sentence contains 4 clauses. We have our main clause with the subject I and the predicate, thought you said we would eat after we saw the movie. And then embedded in the first part of that predicate, we have the subordinate clause with our subject you and predicate said we would eat. And then embedded within that predicate, we have another subordinate clause with our subject we and our predicate would eat. And then we have this clause on the end that is adjoined with our subject we and our predicate saw the movie. All right, so there are 4 clauses in one sentence. And one of the easy ways that I have found to count clauses in sentences is to identify the main verbs and count how many main verbs there are, and that will tell you how many clauses are in a sentence. So in this sentence, we have the main verbs thought, said, eat, and saw. We have 4 main verbs and 4 clauses. All right, so let's try a few more. Okay, we have the sentence, the really tall guy with the bald head and skinny legs went to the trendy shoe store behind the old pizza place. How many clauses are in this sentence? So remember to identify all the main verbs in the sentence. All right. So we have 1 clause in this sentence. We have 1 main verb, went, right? So our subject is the really tall guy with the bald head and skinny legs, and our predicate is went to the trendy shoe store behind the old pizza place. Okay, so one thing to be careful about when identifying main verbs is to make sure you're only counting main verbs and not auxiliary verbs. So we have the sentence, I should read this book. That has 1 main verb, read. Should is an auxiliary verb. So this sentence contains 1 clause. Also in the example, do you have any questions? This also contains 1 main verb, have. Do is an auxiliary verb. Okay, so this sentence also has just 1 clause. Okay, let's try another one. So we have the sentence, you don't know what she said to me after you left. So go ahead and count the main verbs and see if you can identify how many clauses are in this sentence. All right, so hopefully you came up with 3 clauses. Our main verbs in this sentence are know, said, and left. Remember, don't, and you don't know. Don't is an auxiliary verb, so that would not count as a main verb. Okay, so in the next quiz, you will be doing exactly this. You'll be identifying how many clauses are in a sentence. But before you start that, there's one more thing I want to go over that will help you with identifying clauses, and that is infinitive clauses. So an infinitive clause is a clause which contains an infinitive or non-finite verb, which just means a verb that doesn't have any tense. So an example would be, I want you to play with me. So the infinitive verb in this is to play. And this is a sentence with 2 clauses. So we have our main clause with our subject I and predicate want you to play with me. And then we have our embedded clause with our subject you and our predicate to play with me. Okay, so that's easy enough. However, we can also have infinitive clauses that look like this. I want to play. Now this is also a complex sentence with 2 clauses. Even though it looks like there is only 1 subject, I, there are actually two subjects in this sentence. And the second subject is what we call big pro, which pro stands for pronoun, and this is a silent pronoun. Okay, so our main clause would be I want to play, right, with our subject being I and our predicate being want to play. And then embedded within that is our second clause, which our subject is big pro, and our predicate is to play. And it sounds weird, but there are actually a lot of reasons why we believe these silent pronouns occur that have to do with theta roles and binding theory, which we won't get into here. But just know that the silent pronoun is there and it is acting as the subject in an infinitive clause. And you could think of it as saying, I want myself to play, right? So kind of sticking that pronoun in there is what you're really saying when you say I want to play. So this will still work for our counting the main verbs method, right? In I want to play, we have two main verbs, want and play, so that forms our two clauses. Okay, and then back to our example on the top, I want you to play with me. So what this actually looks like is I want you, so I being the subject, and then want you to play with me being the predicate, and then the subject of the second clause is actually also big pro, and then to play with me. So again, we can count our two main verbs, want and play, and come up with our two clauses. All right, so go ahead and practice identifying clauses in the next quiz. And then when you've got that down, we'll move on to the next lecture where we'll talk about complement clauses.